After the controversy last week of me looking at the evidence for arthrosomid, this week I thought I'd do something slightly less controversial. So I thought I'd look at COVID vaccinations or whether the moon landings were real. Anyway, naughty naughty. Before we start, you might be wondering why I'm wearing a LeBron James Cleveland Cavaliers rookie jersey from 2003. And why there's a pair of limited edition Jason Tatum Jordan trainers sitting on the table. Check these. It's because I've been a huge basketball fan for over 20 years. And this week, one of the biggest stories in sports medicine came from the NBA. During the 2024-25 season, 7 NBA players ruptured their Achilles tendon, including one of the faces of the league, our very own Jason Tatum. Previous record was 4, so the NBA launched an investigation to try and understand why. Researchers also published a paper in the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine, and the NBA publicly challenged its conclusions. So who's right? Welcome to the Sunday Paper Roundup, where I read the paper so you don't have to. This week's paper isn't actually the story. The way it was interpreted is, because this happens in medicine all the time. One paper says one thing, another group of experts disagree, people become confused, doctors debate. So today, rather than simply telling you what this paper found, I want to show you how a clinical academic thinks about research. The researchers analysed 19 NBA players who suffered an Achilles tendon rupture over an 11-year period. They found that in the 10 to 15 games before injury, those players were playing slightly more minutes than their own season average. So their conclusion was that short-term increases in workload may be associated with Achilles rupture, a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. Except the NBA reviewed its own data and said it found no relationship between minutes played before injury and Achilles tendon rupture. So who's right? Bugger. Here's how I reconcile these two positions. One possible explanation is that they're asking subtly different questions. The researchers compared injured players with their own previous workload, whereas the NBA appears to have looked across the league to ask whether minutes played predict Achilles rupture. Those approaches overlap, but they're not necessarily identical. Now, that doesn't prove that's why they reached different conclusions. It's simply my interpretation of the apparent disagreement. But here's the bit that most people miss. Interestingly, the increase in workload over the previous 10 to 15 games was essentially the only statistically significant finding in the paper. The researchers found no significant association with age, playing position, schedule congestion, early sport specialization, or season-long workload. So we're interpreting one positive signal in an otherwise largely negative study, and that's important because if you only read the headline, you'd think they discovered the cause. They didn't. They identified one interesting signal that deserves further investigation, and that's a very different conclusion. One of the first things we're taught as clinical academics is not to read the conclusion first, read the methods, because the methods tell you what question the researchers were actually asking. The authors themselves are very transparent. There were only 19 injuries, no healthy control group, multiple statistical comparisons, and they repeatedly describe this work as exploratory and hypothesis generating rather than proving cause and effect. And that's not a criticism. That's good science. Good researchers are honest about what their data can and cannot tell us. Perhaps the most exciting part of this story is what comes next. The NBA has said it's now exploring artificial intelligence to analyze these injuries. Now, maybe I'm showing my age, but when someone says AI, I still think of Allen Iverson, crossed over Jordan. Nowadays, AI means something very different. Imagine analyzing every sprint, every jump, every landing, every acceleration, every change of direction from every game across thousands of athletes. Humans ask questions, but AI can help identify patterns that humans never even think to ask about. Perhaps your answer isn't simply minutes played. Perhaps it's a complex interaction between recent workload, calf fatigue, recovery, movement patterns, previous injury, and tendon biology. That's exactly the sort of problem that AI could help us solve. I'm pretty sure Allen Iverson would have a view on it as well. So what's my verdict for this paper? Should you ignore it? Should you be aware of it? Or should you go ahead and change your practice? My verdict, be aware of it. This paper identifies an interesting signal and it asks an important question. It's a thoughtful piece of work, but it doesn't provide enough evidence to change how we monitor workload in elite athletes. The NBA's analysis reminds us that signal isn't yet convincing enough to explain the problem. The truth is probably more complicated than either explanation on its own. Good science isn't about proving you're right. It's about being willing to change your mind when better evidence comes along. Good clinicians read the conclusions. Great clinicians read the methods, because that's where the real story usually is. Anyway, I'll see you next Sunday. I'll keep breaking down the evidence as it lands. Love these. I'm not sure I can pull them off though. Peace.